Let's get right to our senior foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, who's on the ground in Kabul. Again, Ian, he met with Afghanistan's president just weeks ago in Washington. He said Afghan leaders gave up. The military collapsed.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty harsh assessment. Bear in mind that President Ashraf Ghani did, in fact, leave the country. He's one of the first to leave the country. But, I think a lot of the criticisms were unfair. Remember that the administration here was cut out of all negotiations that the Americans were having together with the Taliban. So they marginalized the Afghan government. So any peace negotiations that were going on afterwards were pretty worthless because the Americans had already said that they would leave. I mean, there are lots of questions about relitigating what had happened. There are people who disagree about the threat on the ground, whether or not departing the country is a good decision or not. Al-Qaeda still exists here. There are other terrorist organizations. And now the Taliban controls the country. There are real fears that there could be vast ungoverned spaces allowing extremism and terrorism to flourish again. We heard the British Defence Secretary and the head of the UK military saying exactly that in the last 7 days. But even if you think this was the right decision, the manner in which it's being conducted, I think, will leave a lot of people dumbfounded.
Ian, with our viewers watching at this hour, the president now addressing the nation, give us a sense of the situation there in Kabul at the airport. It's my understanding that it hasn't been secured yet. So with the president talking about evacuating thousands of American personnel and thousands of Afghans who bravely helped the U.S. over the course of 20 years, we're still waiting to see that, and we still don't have an airport that's secure. Did we lose Ian there? We'll bring in our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, because, Martha, I do think that is the central question. We heard the president's continuing promise there. He said it's hard and messy. It deeply saddens me what we're seeing on the ground there. But he continued that promise that we will evacuate thousands, and not only American personnel, but the Afghans who helped the U.S. through so many years of conflict.
And that is going to be very difficult, and there is no real solid plan in place on how to do that. They want to do that. They want to get those Afghans out of the country, but getting them even to the airport at this point is nearly impossible. And those perimeters around the airport, they are not secure yet. Those horrible scenes that you played earlier, David, that we're looking at again now of people cramming to the airport, clinging to those airplanes. You know, President Biden doubled down on what he had said originally about wanting to get out of Afghanistan. But just going forward with Ian's point, this really isn't about withdrawing from Afghanistan. That is a debatable point. There are many people who think that is a good idea. What they want to talk about is how this was done. Just look at those pictures. There was not a plan in place on how to deal with that. The president also said we didn't get them out earlier because many didn't want to go. Well, many didn't want to go because people like President Biden were saying it was highly unlikely that the Taliban would overtake that country. So there are failures on so many levels here, David. Failure of diplomacy, failure of that military training. The president talked about how we had trained those Afghan troops for 20 years, and this happened. What did we do wrong? And a failure of intelligence, David. Yes, people were predicting that possibly at some point the Taliban may take over, but they were not predicting that it could be so fast. And we have been dealing with the Taliban now for 20 years.
Yes, he said it was possible. This was just weeks ago. The president said it's possible, but highly unlikely we would be seeing what's unfolding now. Martha, quickly before we move on, I just wanted to ask about his reference to veterans in this country, the men and women who served in Afghanistan, and, of course, our Gold Star families who lost loved ones in Afghanistan. The president saying this is deeply personal for them, and he tried to make the case for himself as well.
That's exactly right. It is deeply personal for them, David. They look at this. I've talked to so many veterans, and Gold Star families are shattered watching these scenes and asking themselves, what was this for? Because many just feel like we've gone backwards 20 years. The Taliban has taken over this country. You know, President Biden talks about human rights. How are they going to do that? How are they going to help those women and educating people and human rights with the Taliban in charge? And the veterans, they are asking themselves the same question. What was this for? They fought honorably. They fought for the men and women next to them. But they look at these scenes in horror, David.
Martha Raddatz with us live in Washington. I want to get up to Capitol Hill. Rachel Scott, who covers Congress for us, because Rachel, Democrats and Republicans both reacting. There have been briefings over the course of the last 24 hours or so, and you've got reporting already on reaction coming in, and essentially a key Republican arguing that this is on the president.
Yes, David, perhaps the strongest criticism that we have heard yet, coming just moments before the president walked out to the podium, from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who called this an unmitigated disaster. He said this is a stain on the reputation of the USA, that Afghanistan is lost, and that terrorists around the world are cheering at the defeat of the U.S. military. His message to the administration is now to quickly evacuate the Americans and the allies that are still on the ground there. And I can tell you that is a sentiment that we have heard from Democrats and Republicans alike. As you have mentioned, members of the House and the Senate were briefed this weekend by senior administration officials. I heard that the call between House members was really contentious. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy calling this an embarrassment to our nation, saying the ramifications would last for decades. But I have spoken to Democrats and Republican members of Congress today, and they do agree on one thing. They both have this question of how could the administration misjudge the situation so poorly on the ground, David, and they want more briefings to get that answer.
Many more questions to come on that front. How was this missed, this swiftness with which the Taliban swept across that country? I do want to bring in John Karl, who has covered so many presidential administrations for us here at ABC. And Mitch McConnell had gone on to argue, John, just a short time ago, that he had argued strenuously against withdrawal with not only President Biden, but with President Obama before him and President Trump just before President Biden, which reminds us all of how long this debate has been playing out in Washington about when to pull out of Afghanistan and how.
4 presidents have been in office since this military effort began right after September 11th. 3 of those presidents expressed a desire to completely withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan. Certainly, that is something that Obama wanted to do from the start. Ultimately, was convinced by the military that first he needed to surge additional forces into Afghanistan. It's something that Donald Trump expressed repeatedly, and of course signed that agreement with the Taliban that would have called for an even more rapid departure of U.S. forces than what we're seeing now, to depart all U.S. forces by May 1st. And now, of course, Biden. And Biden is the one that has expressed a determination to do this despite the advice that he got from his own military advisors, most of whom, his top military advisors, told him that there would be bad repercussions to have a complete withdrawal under such a short time frame, urging him to keep some force, 3,000 or 4,000 troops in Afghanistan until there could be a political resolution between the Taliban and the Afghan government. But David, you know, one point here is listening to Biden, you get a sense that he's portraying the options here as a simple choice between withdrawing all American forces or having a war that never ends, between essentially peace or war with the Taliban. And I think that what you'll hear from many people that have worked on this issue, many in the military, is that it's not as simple as that. You know, we don't suddenly achieve peace by withdrawing U.S. troops, all troops out of Afghanistan, and that's what we're seeing now. Could this have been done in a more orderly fashion? Was there really the urgency to do this right now and in this way?
And certainly the largest question, John, as you alluded to right there at the end, is at the very least, how did the last 24 to 48 hours, how was that allowed to happen? I want to get to Stephanie Ramos, who was in the East Room. She's back out on the North Lawn of the White House. Stephanie, you were standing at the White House just a week ago when the Taliban began to sweep through cities, and you could see this the currents beginning across Afghanistan. You pressed the president asking about what he made of what he was seeing and whether or not anything would change, and he told you then, "I do not regret my decision." He stood firm on that again today.
Absolutely, David. It is clear that the president is staying the course. As you said, I asked him about it point blank last week, if his current plan to withdraw would change, and he said no. And he re-emphasized today the amount of money that has been poured into Afghanistan, the equipment that has been given to the Afghan forces. The president continuing to say this is on the Afghan forces, that they need the will to fight for their country. And David, what stuck out to me the most is when the president said Americans should not die in a war that Afghan forces cannot fight for themselves. He said it repeatedly throughout his remarks in different ways, and it's just clear that the president is not budging on this point. Now, we also understand that, the president wanted to make clear to the American public that why we were in Afghanistan and what America's interests are in Afghanistan, and even speaking to criticism, saying that he would not pass this war along to another president, and he is sticking with that plan. David.
Stephanie Ramos, our thanks to you. And on that point, Terry Moran, Stephanie brings up the president saying we've spent more than $1 trillion, that he was not going to send any more men and women of our armed services over into Afghanistan, making a point that he knows polling in the past has shown the American people agree with. But at the same time, this point of what Mitch McConnell said this afternoon, which is something that the president will have to answer to, that he overruled his own military leaders and that the president now owns this.
Exactly, David. It's a speech that seemed to miss the moment. He gave a speech defending his decision to be the president who did withdraw all American forces from our longest war in Afghanistan. And he's right, and you're right in the sense that that is a popular opinion in the United States. The American people, if they give any thought to American troops in Afghanistan over the past several years and more, the only thought was, what are we still doing there? And Joe Biden wanted to be the president, as did Donald Trump, as did others, as John Carl pointed out, to withdraw the troops. The question is this disaster that we are watching in front of our eyes in Kabul, in Afghanistan, throughout Afghanistan, and its impact on American power and prestige around the world. And he didn't answer the question as to how his administration bungled this. In fact, he shifted blame. He said, the buck stops here, but it was hard to see where he actually accepted responsibility. He blamed former President Trump. He rarely mentions Donald Trump by name, but he did, saying that Donald Trump's agreement kind of boxed him in. He blamed the Afghan government. He blamed Afghan troops. He blamed the Afghan people who had decided, he said some had decided that they wanted to wait a while to see if they could get out in an orderly fashion. He did not in any way accept responsibility for the catastrophe that's unfolding in Kabul, and I think missed a moment to demonstrate the kind of leadership to live up to that saying, the buck stops here.
An important point, Terry. The president giving a speech this afternoon, making a case that is somewhat popular with the American people, but only in one line acknowledging those horrific images now being seen by the world. He said, it saddens me. But again, it was a single reference to the horrific images that we've seen over the last 24 hours. I want to give the final thought to Ian Pannell and our team on the scene who have been bravely reporting this for several days now. And Ian, your line froze when I was asking you earlier just to give us the sense of what's happening on the ground. The president made some significant promises there that he would get thousands of American personnel out of Afghanistan, including, in addition to that, the Afghan interpreters and those who helped our forces over the course of 20 years, thousands of Afghans out as well. But at last word, the airport wasn't even secured yet.
The airport certainly wasn't secured. That had to happen. Flights were suspended. But the key question is how? There are thousands of Afghans now hiding at home. These are people who risk their lives to act as interpreters, to fight alongside U.S. forces out on the front lines. They're now scared to come out of their houses, and they're unable to get to the airport. There is now only one road that leads into the military side of the airport, which is where these planes are departing from. There is now a Taliban checkpoint there. Foreign nationals are being allowed through. Afghan nationals are being turned away. And there was one special immigrant visa applicant who'd worked with U.S. Special Forces, who ABC was in contact with. He sent a heart-wrenching message saying, if we stay here, we're going to be slaughtered. If we stay here, I will die. Please help me get there. He was supposed to come here to talk to us on the day that the Taliban came into town. He's now so scared that he's just hiding at home. So he's scared to leave his house. He can't come out onto the streets, and now he can't even get to the airport. That's just one applicant. You're talking about thousands of people and their families. There is no system in place here. There was no plan in place. There's no real agreement with the Taliban. Again, we offered an unconditional withdrawal. These kinds of details could have been worked out. A real plan could have been in place. It wasn't, and that's why we're seeing the tragedy down the road.
Ian Pannell with an extraordinary portrait on the ground there. Ian, thank you, describing by one estimate, hundreds of Afghan people hiding in their homes now, hoping to get out of that country, but knowing that the Taliban now controls that one lone road to the international airport there in Kabul. Just an extraordinary scene that will continue to play out in the coming days. Our thanks to Ian and Martha, John, Rachel, Stephanie, Terry, and our entire team.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.